Mornings in Silverbrook always began with a sigh, sometimes mine, sometimes the kettle's. Today it was both. I stood in the kitchen, my hands wrapped around a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee, watching the mist roll lazily off the hills beyond our backyard. The house was quiet, save for the occasional clink of Leo's spoon against his cereal bowl. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was vacant. Stretched thin and heavy, like a room waiting for someone to come home who never really would. Adrian's suit jacket still hung on the coat rack by the door, though he hadn't worn it in months. Years, actually. He used to come home between assignments, briefcase in one hand, exhaustion in the other. Now he simply didn't. His job with the logistics firm had taken him all over the world, and apparently, into a life that didn't include us much anymore. He called sometimes. Sent the occasional package. A novelty toy for Leo. A scarf from somewhere cold. But he hadn't slept in our bed since before Leo's 7th birthday. I didn't cry about it anymore. Crying implied Hope had been wounded, and I'd long since tucked that hope away in a drawer. Now I just moved through the days, waking up, packing Leo's lunch, checking the mailbox, answering polite but pitying glances at the local market. Silverbrook was the kind of place where absence was its own form of gossip. "How's Adrian?" they'd ask with tilted heads and tentative smiles. "Still overseas?" I'd nod, always nodding, always pretending like I believed he was coming back. Like I believed I wanted him to. "Mom, do bears like chocolate milk?" Leo asked suddenly, peeking over the kitchen counter. His cheeks were still sticky from syrup, his eyes bright with something far stronger than mine, wonder. "I think they'd love it," I said, gently brushing crumbs from his chin. "But only if it's really cold." He grinned, satisfied with the answer, and returned to his cereal. 7 years old and already so intuitive. He never asked why Daddy wasn't home for the school play or why the birthday calls always came late. But he knew. In his own quiet way, he knew things were off-kilter. After breakfast, I walked him to school. The streets of Silverbrook were lined with dogwood trees just starting to bloom, their pink petals catching in Leo's hair. I smoothed them away absently, trying not to think about how long we could keep pretending everything was fine. I told myself I was doing it for Leo, that stability mattered more than truth, that routines were safety. But deep down, I knew. I was just afraid. By the time I returned home, the silence was unbearable again. The ticking of the wall clock echoed like a taunt. Noon came and went. I answered emails, most of them dull, parent association updates, a spam message about a contest I hadn't entered. But tucked between them was something from Adrian. Just a blank subject line and a single sentence. "Can we talk soon?" I stared at it for a long time. The kind of soon that comes after months of nothing feels like a threat, not a gesture. I didn't reply. Not then. Instead, I wandered through the house, touching the worn edges of furniture, tracing grooves in the walls where Leo's crayon drawings had once lived. I stopped in our bedroom. His side of the closet was half empty. It always had been. He never took his things with him, but he never used them either. Just placeholders now. Like him. That night, after putting Leo to bed, I sat by the window with a journal in my lap. I used to write every day. Not the kind of writing people knew about, but the real kind. The bleeding kind. The kind that asked questions even I didn't want answered. Somewhere between the layers of motherhood and loneliness, the words had dried up. But tonight, I wrote one sentence. I live in a hollow home. And it was true. I closed the journal and looked around. The framed photos on the walls, Adrian smiling with Leo at the zoo, our wedding day, our first Christmas in Silverbrook, they felt like props in a play I was no longer acting in. What do you call a marriage where only one person shows up? A memory. A shadow. A door left ajar in the middle of winter. But I didn't slam that door. Not yet. I didn't rage or weep or call anyone to ask what I should do. I just sat there, listening to the quiet hum of a house that no longer felt like home, wondering how long you could live inside a shell before it began to crack. The kettle let out a low whistle in the kitchen. I hadn't turned it on. I didn't remember moving. But maybe I had. Maybe I was still here, still going through the motions, still waiting for what I didn't know. A miracle? A truth? A goodbye? Or maybe just the courage to stop waiting. It happened on a Thursday. A nothing special, leftovers for lunch, Leo has art class kind of Thursday. I remember because I was folding laundry when I heard the front door open. No knock, no call ahead, just the rusty creak of hinges and the sharp thud of shoes carelessly dropped onto the mat. For a second, my heart lurched. I thought maybe something had happened to Leo, maybe someone had brought news, but then I heard the familiar drag of Adrian's suitcase across the floor. I stood in the hallway, frozen. His silhouette appeared at the edge of the living room, blazer still buttoned, expression unreadable. He looked exactly the same. A little more tanned maybe, like the sun had spent more time with him than we had. But there was no smile, no warmth. Just the cold efficiency of a man who had decided something days ago and arrived only now to let me in on it. "Evelyn," he said, like he was reading my name off a chart. "We need to talk." He didn't wait for me to respond. Just walked straight to the kitchen and placed a thick manila envelope on the counter. The weight of it seemed to echo through the room. I didn't move. I couldn't. "I've had these drawn up," he continued, opening the envelope like he was unpacking a sandwich. "It's all very standard. I've waived alimony. You'll find the child support offer inside. I think it's fair." Fair. I stepped forward slowly, the soft pad of my socks silent against the hardwood. I looked down at the documents but didn't touch them. "What is this?" My voice came out quieter than I intended, almost like a stranger's. "Divorce papers," he said simply. I think it's time. You and Leo should make plans to move out before the fall." I stared at him, blinking. "Move out?" He sighed, as though I were being dramatic. "This house is too much for one person. I'll be putting it up for sale." I looked at his face then, really looked. No regret. No grief. Just finality. Like he was informing a tenant their lease was up. Like this place, the life we built here, meant nothing. "Why now?" I asked. "After all this time, you just show up and—" "We've been distant for years, Evelyn," he said, already sliding his phone from his pocket, bored by the conversation. "You know it. I've changed, you've changed. It's not anyone's fault. But you haven't even—" "Look, I don't want to fight," he cut in, with the faux gentleness of someone who's already packed up their guilt. "We're just not the same people anymore. I've moved on. I think it's best if you do too." Moved on. The phrase landed like a punch. "So you come back without warning, hand me papers like a memo, and tell me to leave my home?" My voice shook. Not from weakness. From fury I didn't know I was still capable of. "I'm being civil, Evelyn," he said, jaw tightening. "There's no need to make this harder than it has to be." Harder? He had no idea. "And Leo?" I asked, stepping between him and the door. "Did you think about how this affects him?" He rubbed his forehead. "Of course I did. But he's young. He'll adapt. I'm not trying to take him away from you." The papers outline a visitation schedule. I let out a dry laugh. "You haven't visited in over a year." "I've been busy. Busy building a new life without us." He flinched barely, but I saw it. A crack in the polished stone of his composure. "This isn't a discussion, Evelyn. I'm giving you a few months' notice. That's more than most would." I stared at the man I once knew, and for the first time, I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt clarity. Pure, burning clarity. This wasn't a man struggling with regret. This was a man who'd already rewritten the story and decided I was no longer in it. He gathered his things. Didn't wait for my response. Didn't ask about Leo. Just walked out as easily as he'd walked in, like a delivery man dropping off a parcel. The door clicked shut behind him. I didn't cry. I sat on the couch, staring at the papers he left behind, the sharp corners of legal language slicing into my peace. It felt surreal, like someone had taken scissors to the fabric of my life and expected me to keep wearing it. The refrigerator hummed. A clock ticked somewhere in the distance. And through it all, I just sat, the silence pressing in like fog. I should have screamed. I should have chased after him. I should have torn the papers to shreds. Instead, I folded them neatly, placed them in a drawer. And I waited. Because he thought this would be the end of the story. He had no idea it was just the beginning. I must have sat in the same spot for hours. The sky outside faded from dusty pink to deep blue, but I didn't move. The legal documents remained sealed in the drawer, but the words on them echoed louder in my head than any sound in the house. Divorce. Vacate. Natural. As if Adrian's absence hadn't already hollowed out this life enough. As if his cold return and sudden departure weren't violent in their own quiet way. I didn't even hear Leo come in. The front door opened with a small thump, and his footsteps padded in from the hallway. I blinked, startled back into my body, and looked up just in time to see him toeing off his sneakers. His red party hat had slipped sideways over his dark hair, and he was still clutching the little paper bag of favors from Owen's birthday party. He glanced around, then saw me sitting stiffly on the couch. "Hi, Mama," he said gently, voice cautious in the way only a child's could be when they knew something had shifted but didn't have the words yet to name it. "Did you eat dinner?" I opened my mouth, then closed it again. I didn't remember if I had. Everything since Adrian's visit felt like static. "I'm okay," I said, though my voice cracked slightly. "Did you have fun at the party?" He nodded, then stepped closer. "We played pin the tail on the dinosaur. And there were blue cupcakes." He paused. "I saved you one. It's kinda smushed, though." A smile tried to form on my lips, but failed. I reached out and gently brushed a sprinkle from his cheek. "Thank you, sweetheart." Leo tilted his head, still watching me, and then without a word, he disappeared into the kitchen. I thought maybe he'd gone to play with his Legos or grab his sketch pad, but instead I heard the shuffle of chairs and the creak of the refrigerator. Then the sound of the bread bag opening. The soft clatter of silverware. I furrowed my brow. "Leo?" "Just a second," he called back. A few minutes later, he returned carefully holding a plate. On it sat a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, sliced diagonally, just the way I made it for him. Alongside it was a half-empty glass of milk and the slightly crushed cupcake, now on a paper towel. He set it down on the coffee table and climbed up beside me. "You didn't eat, Mama. So I made you something." My throat tightened so quickly I couldn't speak. He looked at me with those wide, steady eyes, his expression serious. "You looked really sad," he added. "Like you couldn't move." I pressed a hand over my mouth. Tears welled in my eyes and spilled over before I could stop them. But they weren't just tears of sadness. They were something more complicated, something deeper. A quiet sort of awe. My child, my tiny, empathetic boy, had seen the storm inside me and brought me an anchor wrapped in jelly and crustless bread. He didn't panic or ask too many questions. He didn't retreat from my sadness. He sat right next to it. Next to me. I picked up half the sandwich and took a bite, nodding with forced cheer. "It's perfect." He leaned into me then, resting his head on my shoulder. We sat that way for a while, the soft hum of the fridge and the ticking of the clock our only company. My fingers curled into his, small and sticky from frosting. "Mama?" he said after a while. "Yeah, baby. Is Daddy mad at us?" I felt his words like a blade under the ribs. "No," I said softly. "No, he's not mad. He just doesn't want to live here anymore." Leo was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "Do we have to leave?" I could have lied. Could have said it would all be fine, that nothing was changing. But something about his sandwich, his steady little hands, his strength in the face of uncertainty, I owed him honesty. "I don't know yet," I said. "But I promise I won't let anything happen to us." He nodded once, as if that was enough. For now, after he went to bed, I cleaned up the plate and stared at the kitchen counter where Adrian had placed the envelope. The longer I looked at it, the less it scared me. It didn't have power unless I gave it power. And I realized then I didn't want to be dismissed. I didn't want to be folded into the background of someone else's life like an old receipt. I wanted to fight. Not with rage or cruelty, but with precision. With clarity. With quiet strength. Leo had shown me what that looked like. I walked into my office, turned on the lamp, and pulled open the drawer where I kept the passwords Adrian didn't know about. The email address he never remembered existed. The backup drives. The legal folders. I opened a blank document, and I began to write not fiction, not flowers and mystery, but notes. Records. A timeline. A plan. He thought I would crumble. He thought I'd go quietly. But he forgot who I was. He forgot who I'm raising. The first message came the next morning. I saw it before I'd even gotten out of bed, the screen lighting up beside me in the quiet blue light before dawn. Adrian's name. No greeting. No punctuation. Just a statement. Let me know when you've read the papers. I didn't reply. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because he didn't deserve to hear it first. He had shown up with demands and walked out like a businessman closing a deal, not a husband ending a marriage or a father tearing apart his child's home. The least I could do was give him silence, if only for a moment. More texts followed that week. One after another, like bricks being laid into a wall I hadn't agreed to build. You should really start looking for a new place. I can help you get set up elsewhere. No need for lawyers. Let's keep it clean. Silverbrook isn't going to be a good fit for you long term. I have contacts in Bridgeford. I'm offering you a reasonable deal. I'd hate for this to become messy. Messy. That was his word for me fighting back, for not bowing out of the life he was so desperate to rewrite without me in it. At first, I just stared at the texts. Then I started saving them, screenshot by screenshot, date by date. I wasn't sure what I'd need them for, but something told me they might matter later. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe it was because something had shifted inside me since Leo made that sandwich and pressed his little hand into mine. I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Not just anger. Not just sadness. Something more dangerous. Resolve. I began researching. At night, after Leo was asleep, I'd sit in my office with the soft hum of my laptop and the quiet click of keys as I scrolled through legal resources, property law, custody rights. I read forums and state statutes. I downloaded guides and bookmarked names. I learned the difference between equitable distribution and community property. I discovered what counted as abandonment in our state and how child support could be contested. And then, finally, I called someone. Her name was Rena Caldwell. A local attorney I'd heard about through a friend at the library, someone who handled things with quiet ferocity and didn't flinch when people tried to play dirty. I left her a voicemail that night, my voice trembling only slightly. Hi, this is Evelyn Blake. I believe I need representation for an upcoming divorce. And I think it's going to get complicated. She called me back the next morning, and just hearing the confidence in her voice settled something wild inside my chest. You're already 10 steps ahead, she said after I told her everything. Start saving everything he sends. Document every conversation. And don't tell him you've retained counsel yet. Let him keep underestimating you. I hung up the phone and felt the corners of my mouth curve, not into a smile exactly, but something close. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't stuck. I was preparing. Adrian kept texting. You're not being very cooperative. I've got a lot going on. Don't drag this out. I want this resolved before September. September. That was the second time he mentioned a deadline. Once during his abrupt visit and now here. It sat in the middle of his message like a stone in water, out of place, a little too heavy to ignore. Why the rush? Why fall? I didn't ask him. I didn't respond at all. Instead, I created a file on my desktop titled Transition Plan. I opened a savings account at a new credit union. I called our local elementary school to ask what paperwork was needed if Leo stayed enrolled. I spoke to my neighbor, Trina, about her cousin who was a forensic accountant. All of it in whispers and quiet clicks, in between bedtime stories and pancake breakfasts. Adrian thought this was a clean exit. He thought I would fold neatly like one of the shirts I used to iron for his business trips. But I was no longer a woman waiting in doorways or staring at clock hands. I was the kind of woman who documented everything. Who made calls in the dark. Who laid traps with silk thread and a steady hand. One night, Leo came into the kitchen while I was organizing paperwork. His eyes were sleepy, hair mussed. What are you doing, Mama? Just getting some things ready, I said, gently closing the folder. For what? For something important. He blinked at me. Do I have to help? I smiled and brushed his hair back from his face. You already are, sweetheart. Just by being you. He nodded, satisfied with the answer, and padded back to bed. When I returned to my desk, Adrian had sent one final message for the night. Let me know soon. I'm trying to be reasonable. I stared at the screen, fingers hovering over the keyboard. And then, finally, I typed back 2 words. I'm aware. I hit send, closed the laptop, and stood up. Outside, the wind rustled the trees lining our street, and I felt something stir in my own chest, an echo, maybe, of something stronger than fear. This wasn't the end. Not yet. It was the quiet beginning of a very different kind of war. It took 3 tries before I finally turned the key. The East Bridge building stood like a monument to corporate sterility, cold gray panels, perfectly trimmed hedges, a lobby that smelled like printer toner and lemon disinfectant. I wore sunglasses though the sky was overcast and a hood pulled low, even though no one here would recognize me. It didn't matter. The disguise wasn't for them. It was for me. For the part of me still unsure whether this was bravery or madness. The front desk guard didn't blink when I signed the visitor log under Family Emergency. I'd found the key weeks ago while gathering tax documents from Adrian's desk, buried in an envelope marked Utilities. He probably assumed I'd never go near his things. He'd forgotten who I was, or maybe he'd never truly known. The elevator ride was silent, save for the low hum of machinery. As I reached the 6th floor, the hallway greeted me with soft lighting and doors identical in their blandness. His door, Unit 608, looked no different. Still, my hand hesitated before I slipped the key in. Part of me hoped it wouldn't work. That he'd changed the locks. That this whole thing was some awful misunderstanding. It wasn't. The key turned. The door clicked open. I stepped inside and immediately felt the air shift. Cold. Not temperature-wise, just emotionally sterile. The place was pristine. Spotless. Not lived in, but staged. A minimalist couch in sharp gray. A marble island in the kitchen with 2 bar stools pushed in perfectly. No clutter. No signs of life. Just the sterile quiet of a man who had arranged his life to leave no fingerprints. I walked slowly, each footstep too loud against the tile. The fridge was nearly empty. Some bottled water. A single leftover takeout container. A 6-pack of imported beer, for still untouched. No photos. No toys. No trace of Leo. Not even the framed photo of us from our 10th anniversary trip to Charleston, the one that used to sit on his desk. Everything here looked rented, borrowed. Like Adrian had created a space meant only for sleeping and leaving. I moved to the bedroom. A perfectly made bed. Crisp sheets. His cologne sat untouched on the dresser. A single tie draped neatly on the back of a chair. But it was all too tidy. Not in the way he used to be. This wasn't his brand of ordered chaos. This felt curated. Sanitized. Like a hotel room waiting for the next guest. He didn't live here. Not really. And yet, this was the address he gave me for emergencies. The place where he said he stayed when not traveling. I had wanted to find something that made sense. A forgotten note, an open drawer, even a photograph stuffed in a nightstand. Anything to help make sense of why he had grown so distant. Why fall was his deadline. Why he handed me divorce papers like a business memo. But the place was empty in more ways than one. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. I wasn't sure how long I stayed like that. Maybe 5 minutes. Maybe 50. All I knew was that when I heard the key in the lock, my entire body went still. Adrian walked in, briefcase in one hand, phone in the other, talking in that clipped tone he reserved for people he pretended to respect. I told them I want the September audit closed by mid-month. No exceptions. He walked into the kitchen without looking up. No, you tell Leighton he's the one behind schedule, not me. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me. I watched his eyes flicker, not with guilt, not even surprise. Just annoyance. The way you look at a traffic jam or an expired coupon. Evelyn, he said flatly, ending the call without a goodbye. What are you doing here? I stood. You gave me the key. That was for emergencies. You handed me divorce papers without warning. I'd call that an emergency. He set his briefcase down with a heavy sigh. What do you want? I want to understand, I said quietly. Why now? Why like this? You're pushing everything so fast. What's the rush? He crossed to the fridge and pulled out a beer. Cracked it open like we were talking about the weather. I just want a clean break, he said. Start fresh. By fall? He shrugged, not meeting my eyes. It's better that way. Better for who? He didn't answer. Is there someone else? I asked. His jaw tightened, just a fraction. That half-second pause. That quiet stillness before a lie. It's not like that, he said. I let the silence stretch between us until it became unbearable. Well, it's like something, I said. Because this isn't how you end a marriage unless you've already started another one. He stared at the floor, drank his beer, said nothing. I nodded slowly. My heart didn't shatter. It had already been through worse. This was just confirmation. And confirmation can be a strange relief. I won't be erased, Adrian, I said as I walked toward the door. And neither will Leo. His eyes followed me, but he still didn't speak. Not when I opened the door. Not when I stepped into the hallway. Not even when it closed behind me. But he should have. Because I had seen his emptiness now. And I was no longer afraid of it. I never wanted to be the kind of woman who snooped. I had always believed in asking directly, in trusting that people would show you who they were if you gave them the chance. But when Adrian slammed the door on honesty, I found myself standing in front of another one, this one metaphorical and messy, with locks I had never learned how to pick. I wasn't sure I even wanted to open it. But I had to. For Leo. For myself. For the woman I was becoming. George Blake showed up one morning with a bag of bagels and a frown so deep it looked carved. He was Adrian's father, and unlike his son, George had never made me feel like I was in the way. Even now, years into Adrian's absence, he still came by once a week to check on us, usually with some excuse like garden mulch or mail he swore was misdelivered. But this time, he didn't pretend. You're not okay, he said simply, handing me a cinnamon bagel like it was a peace offering. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. I just gestured toward the table where the stack of saved messages lay in neat order. The envelope. My notes. My plan. George read everything silently. Then he leaned back, arms crossed, eyes glinting with the kind of rage only disappointment can summon. That boy is up to something, he muttered. Always was too slick for his own good. But this is something else. I don't know where he goes when he's not traveling, I said. His apartment is a facade. I've seen it. He's not living there, George. He was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card. Clara Hart, he said. Private investigator. She helped me out a few years ago when my neighbor got scammed out of his retirement fund. She's discreet. Smart as hell. I turned the card over in my hand. Pale blue. Clean print. No gimmicks. Just the kind of professional elegance that said, I don't chase shadows. I expose them. It took me 2 days to call her. Clara met me at a quiet tea house outside Silverbrook. She wore a navy trench coat and had the kind of calm, unreadable face I'd always envied. She listened without interrupting, took notes in a small leather journal, and asked questions I hadn't thought to ask myself. How long has he mentioned fall as a deadline? Does he send money from a joint account or a separate one? Has Leo ever seen him with another woman? I answered as best I could, each response tugging a little more at the frayed edge of my sanity. She promised to dig around. She said she wouldn't make assumptions. She would follow facts, not feelings. A week later, she returned with both. We met in the back booth of the same tea house. Clara slid a folder across the table without ceremony, like she was handing me a menu. His name is on the lease of another apartment, she said. Different side of Eastbridge. Under a different address than the corporate one. He's listed as the emergency contact at a local pediatric clinic. The child's name is Max, 6 years old. I couldn't speak. She continued, her voice softer now. He lives there with a woman named Tessa. Works nights at a place called Club Vesper. Blonde. About 10 years younger than you. They've been living together for nearly 2 years. I opened the folder with trembling fingers. Photos. Clear, indisputable photos. Adrian leaving the building with a child, dark-haired, small. Tessa with her arm hooked around his, laughing. A candid shot of the three of them at a weekend market, Max holding a red balloon and Adrian holding his hand. I stared until my eyes burned. 2 years. While I'd been packing Leo's lunches and writing bedtime stories. While I'd been explaining his father's absence with made-up meetings and delayed flights. Adrian had been across town, building a parallel life. Another woman. Another son. Another home. Clara touched my hand gently. I can get more. But I figured this was enough for now. It was more than enough. Later that night, after I'd put Leo to sleep and poured myself a glass of wine I didn't drink, I called George. He answered on the second ring. Tell me. I did. Every detail. Every lie. Every photograph. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. That boy, he said quietly. That boy is not my son anymore. The next day, he arrived with a folder of his own, handwritten pages, and notarized documents. I've spoken to my lawyer, he said. I'm making it official. I'm rewriting my will. Everything goes to Leo. And you. I stared at him, speechless. You've been more of a daughter to me than Adrian's ever been a son, he said. And I won't let you be discarded like some old coat. Not while I'm still breathing. The lies had cracked open something I never expected, a support system built not on blood, but on truth. I wasn't alone in this. And I wasn't defenseless. Adrian thought he had spun a perfect web. He didn't realize I'd just lit a match. There was something deliciously ironic about hiding in plain sight. For years, while the world saw me as Evelyn Blake, quiet wife, mother, forgotten woman at the edge of Silverbrook, I had been someone else entirely. Someone bolder, sharper, untethered from the version of myself that wilted under Adrian's distance. Underneath the daily rituals of school pickups and grocery runs, I lived a second life. One that Adrian never bothered to notice. I was the woman behind the Marigold mysteries. Writing had always been my secret rebellion. It started when Leo was still a baby, asleep in his bassinet while I sat on the couch with a laptop and too much silence. I wrote to fill the void Adrian left behind. At first, it was just a short story, a woman who worked in a flower shop and solved murders on the side. Mrs. Bellamy, with her dainty teacups and razor-sharp instincts, came to life during stolen hours and restless nights. I hadn't planned to publish. But one day, on a dare for myself, I sent it off to a small digital publisher under the name A. Marlowe. It sold. Then it sold more. Then it exploded. 6 books later, the Marigold Mysteries were a best-selling series with a devoted following and a television adaptation in pre-production. I'd built a world that belonged only to me, brick by careful brick. Adrian never knew. He never asked where the extra money came from, and I never offered to tell. His attention span was so devoted to his career, his travel, and, apparently, his secret family, that he never noticed the royalty statements in a separate account or the events I attended under a pseudonym. The irony was almost laughable. I thought of this as I sat across from George again, both of us surrounded by piles of documents and a shared fury that hummed between us like electricity. You should tell him, George said, tapping the edge of a glossy Marigold Mysteries cover. Let him know who he walked away from. No, I said, calmly but firmly. Not yet. He raised a brow. Still playing the long game? I nodded. He thinks I'm the woman he left behind. I want him to believe that. Right up until the moment I take everything. George leaned back and smiled. Spoken like Mrs. Bellamy herself. That made me laugh. Writing those books had saved me in ways I hadn't understood until now. Mrs. Bellamy wasn't just a character. She was who I wanted to be, clever, composed, unapologetically in control. She never let anyone get the best of her. She never waited for someone to rescue her. And I wasn't waiting anymore, either. I went into my home office that evening and locked the door behind me. The walls were lined with outlines and timelines, character arcs, and photos of potential casting choices. A signed poster of the first Marigold cover hung above my desk. My laptop blinked to life, and with it, so did Evelyn Blake, the real one. The one no one saw coming. Emails from the show's producer were waiting. Script approvals. Costume designs. Set photos. The premiere was scheduled for early spring, and there was already interest from international networks. I responded to each with polite efficiency, hiding the grin that tugged at the corners of my mouth. Soon, everyone would know who A. Marlowe really was. I glanced at Leo's door across the hallway. He'd started drawing his own detective comics lately, complete with magnifying glasses, mysterious footprints, and culprits named Mr. Frown. He was so proud, so certain his mom could do anything. I had no intention of proving him wrong. And then there was George. The next day, he came to me with the final will documents. His decision was unshakable. Your family, Evelyn. And I want you and Leo protected. I felt my eye sting, but I didn't let the tears fall. I simply hugged him, tightly, the way I'd once hoped Adrian would come home and hug me after being away so long. But George's embrace felt real. Steady. Rooted in something other than obligation. When the notary finished signing everything, I leaned back in my chair, feeling this shift in the air. Adrian had built a new life. But I had built a legacy. He had rewritten his story to exclude me, but I had written my own, page by page, until I no longer needed his version of anything. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. Autonomy. A future that belonged to me and my son, and the stories I would continue to tell. Adrian still had no idea who he was dealing with. He thought I was Evelyn Blake, the discarded wife. He didn't know I was also A. Marlowe, and that the world was just beginning to read what I'd written. I heard the tires before I saw the car. It was late morning, the sun pressing through the windows with a soft gold warmth that didn't match the storm brewing in my chest. I'd made pancakes for Leo, read through some contract notes for the Marigold TV adaptation, and even managed to trim the hedges, all while waiting. Waiting for the knock I knew would come. It wasn't a matter of if, only when. And then it came. 3 sharp raps on the front door. I didn't flinch. I just wiped my hands on a dish towel, smoothed the hem of my blouse, and opened it. Adrian stood on the porch with a manufactured smirk. Tessa was next to him, arms folded and sunglasses perched high on her head like a crown. Behind them, in the car still idling in the driveway, was Max, face pressed against the window, chewing on something disinterested. A surreal tableau. Like a parody of a family photo that someone had printed too fast and too blurry. "Morning," Adrian said. No apology, no greeting. Just that same detached cheerfulness he used with waiters and realtors. I raised a brow. Didn't realize we had plans. "We figured it's time to finalize things," he said, waving a folder in the air. I brought the updated divorce agreement. Thought we'd save everyone the back and forth. Tessa gave me a tight smile. "Hope this won't take long." I let them in without a word. Leo was at his friend's house for a sleepover, and the house was still quiet except for the clock ticking in the kitchen. Adrian looked around like he was checking to see what he still owned. They sat in the living room as if they belonged there. He placed the folder on the coffee table like a prize. Everything's outlined. Property, custody, support. It's clean and efficient. If you sign today, we can file this week. I sat across from him, legs crossed, unbothered. And what if I don't sign it? Adrian leaned back with that smug confidence that used to make me second-guess myself. Not today. I mean, I thought we agreed this was best. You and Leo could start fresh somewhere else. We could avoid dragging this through court. Tessa chimed in with a laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Adrian's being generous, you know. I smiled politely, then leaned forward and opened my own folder. A much thicker one. I slid it across the table to Adrian, watching his eyes narrow. "What's this?" "My version." He flipped it open, eyes scanning the pages, his jaw starting to tense. "You filed already?" he said. 3 weeks ago, I replied. "And I've included the evidence my attorney will be submitting, emails, messages, bank records. The address of the apartment you share with Tessa. Oh, and copies of Max's pediatric records where you listed yourself as father." Tessa's lips parted slightly, a sharp inhale. You what? I turned to her calmly. Don't worry. You're not on trial here. But you should know that what Adrian did, maintaining 2 households, hiding assets, threatening to remove me and Leo from our home, that's going to weigh heavily when the court evaluates character. Adrian stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. You're bluffing. No, I said, rising slowly. You're forgetting I have every message you sent telling me to get out. Every veiled threat. And more importantly, I have the deed. His brow furrowed. What deed? I walked to the side table, opened a drawer, and pulled out the document George had signed. I handed it to him. You thought you'd inherited this house. You didn't. George gifted it to me, legally, 2 years ago, after you started disappearing for months at a time. He saw this coming long before I did. Adrian's face flushed red, a sharp contrast to the sudden pale cast of Tessa's. You're lying. No, I said with quiet certainty. You lied. And you got sloppy. You thought I'd be too meek to notice. Tessa stood, arms tight around her waist. Why didn't you tell me you didn't own this place? He didn't answer her. His eyes were locked on mine. You don't get to remove me from my own home, I continued. You don't get to make demands like you're the one who was abandoned. Adrian's voice shook with rage. You think this makes you smart? You think you've won? I smiled then, not with triumph, but with peace. No, I said. I think I've reclaimed what was always mine. He stared at me, fury rising in waves, but it couldn't reach me. Not anymore. I had built my strength slowly, quietly, in the background of his arrogance. And now he was watching it unfold, powerless to stop it. Tessa moved toward the door without waiting. I'm not being dragged into court with you, she snapped. Handle your mess, Adrian. He followed her out reluctantly, shooting one last glare over his shoulder. This isn't over. But it was. He just didn't know it yet. I closed the door, leaned against it, and breathed. The reckoning had come. And I was still standing. It didn't feel like a victory. Not at first. Even with the evidence laid out, with Adrian's mouth drawn tight, and Tessa's face paling at every revelation, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like shedding a skin I hadn't realized I'd been wearing. I wasn't the woman waiting at the window anymore. I wasn't the one watching the clock or rehearsing polite silence. I was the one holding the script now, and Adrian didn't even know which act we were in. He showed up again 3 days later. Alone this time. No folder. No Tessa. No Max. Just a stiff jaw and storm clouds behind his eyes. Leo was home, curled on the couch with his sketch pad, humming while he drew. When the knock came, he looked up, then at me. Is it Daddy again? Yes, I said, smoothing his hair. But don't worry. I've got it. I opened the door to find Adrian standing there with a look I'd never seen before. Not arrogance. Not detachment. Desperation. We need to talk, he said. Out here is fine, I replied, stepping onto the porch and closing the door behind me. His eyes darted, scanning the street like he expected spectators. Maybe he'd hoped for some version of me that would take him back inside, offer tea, make this easy. Not today. You've made a mess, he said, voice low. All of this, dragging lawyers into it, throwing around accusations. I raised a brow. Accusations? He hesitated. I didn't. Would you like to see the photos again? I asked. Or maybe the pediatric records. Should I pull up the texts where you told me to get out before fall, like I was a tenant on borrowed time? His mouth opened, then closed. You were careless, I continued. You underestimated me. That's on you. I didn't want this to be public, he said tightly. It's bad for my image. It's bad for work. Then maybe you should have thought twice before starting a second family in secret. He shifted uncomfortably, rubbing the back of his neck. Tessa's furious. She thought I owned the house. She's threatening to leave. Sounds like a personal problem, I said. You blindsided me, he muttered, more to himself than to me. You've changed. I had to, I said softly. You taught me how. And just as I turned to go back inside, I heard a small voice from behind the screen door. Mom? Leo stepped out, clutching something in his hand. His expression was calm, but his eyes flicked from me to Adrian with wary curiosity. "Can I show him?" he asked me. I knelt beside him. "Only if you want to." Leo stepped forward, holding up a hardcover book with a shiny navy cover. The title glinted in the sunlight, The Marigold Mysteries, A Garden of Clues. "My mom wrote this," he said proudly. Adrian stared. "What?" Leo beamed. "She's A. Marlowe. That's her secret name." I didn't speak. I let Leo's truth hang there, unashamed and full of wonder. "I helped with some of the mystery parts," Leo added. "She's writing a new one. It's about a kid who solves crimes with his mom. He has a dog named Captain Pickles." Adrian looked stunned. "You?" "Yes," I said simply. "While you were flying around the world or across town, I was building something. You thought I'd be nothing without you. But the truth is, I became someone you never even saw coming." He looked at Leo, then back at me. I could see the panic beginning to creep into his face. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about the realization that his narrative, his neatly curated version of events, was unraveling. And not just legally. Socially, personally, financially. "You don't understand what this could do to me," he said. "At work. With Max. With everything. Maybe you should have thought about that before lying to everyone," I said. "You've spent years building a facade. Now it's cracking. That's not my fault. That's yours." He turned to Leo again, softer now. "Buddy." Leo took a small step back, pressing closer to me. "Don't call me that." Adrian's shoulders slumped. "Game over," I said, stepping between them. "You don't get to rewrite this anymore." He stood there for a long moment, lost in his unraveling. Eventually, he walked away. Back inside, Leo curled beside me again on the couch. We didn't say much. He flipped through his sketch pad, showing me his latest drawing, a boy detective standing in front of a large, shadowy house. Beside him, a woman holding a flashlight and smiling. "That's me and you," he said. "We find the truth together." I kissed his temple. Always. The weight of everything didn't vanish, but it shifted. What once felt like loss now felt like release. Adrian had gambled on my silence. He never saw my voice coming. The letter came in a plain white envelope, addressed in a generic font, but I recognized the return address immediately, Adrian's company headquarters. I didn't open it right away. I let it sit on the kitchen counter beside a bowl of ripe pears and Leo's crayon drawings until the late afternoon sun cast gold across the room. There was something poetic about waiting. I had spent so many years on pause, always reacting to Adrian's next move. Not anymore. When I finally unfolded the paper, a clipped tone spilled across the page. Adrian had been demoted and transferred. A remote branch office near the northern coast, some satellite logistics hub that wouldn't even appear on most corporate maps. The sort of assignment given to people the company no longer wanted to deal with, but didn't want to fire outright. He was out of the spotlight. Out of reach. Out of power. I stared at the letter for a moment, then slid it into the drawer and closed it without a second thought. There was nothing left to say to him. Nothing left to wait for. The life I had shared with Adrian was over, reduced to ink and signatures, court filings, and the soft thud of a door closing for the final time. The house felt different now. Not just safer, fuller. I moved through each room with a new kind of ownership. Not the anxious, delicate kind that came from walking on eggshells, but the grounded kind. I rearranged the furniture. I repainted the kitchen cabinets a warm sage green. I even started a small herb garden in the windowsill. Leo named the basil plant Mr. Whiffle. One afternoon, George came by with a large envelope tucked beneath his arm. "Got something for you," he said, handing it over with a proud smile. Inside was a copy of a newspaper from out of state, featuring a headline that nearly stole my breath. Marigold Mystery set to premiere on international networks this fall. Below it, a still from the pilot episode, Mrs. Bellamy in her wide-brimmed hat, standing beside a garden gate, eyes narrowed in mid-investigation. The actress looked just as I had imagined her. I pressed the photo to my chest, stunned. "It's really happening." George beamed. "Told you the world would catch up to your talent. I'm just glad I'll be able to say I knew you before you were famous." "You still know me now," I said, hugging him. And I'll never forget that. The show premiered 6 weeks later. Leo and I watched the first episode curled under a blanket, popcorn between us. He gasped when he heard the line we'd written together, the one where the young sidekick in the story spotted a muddy footprint and said, "Always check the soles. Secrets love to cling to shoes." He turned to me with wide eyes. "You used my idea." I smiled. "Of course I did. You're my best co-writer." He grinned so wide it nearly broke my heart with pride. As the weeks passed, life settled into something softer, something real. I spent my mornings writing. My afternoons were filled with meetings, school pickups, and the occasional walk through Silverbrook's now blooming park trails. Leo made new friends. He thrived in school. He started taking a beginner's art class on Saturdays, where his detective characters were slowly evolving into fully fledged comic heroes. And me? I flourished. The show was a success. Critics praised its charm, its wit, its warmth. The books flew off the shelves. Publishers wanted more. I signed a new contract, this time with my real name alongside the pen name, Evelyn Blake, writing as A.E. Marlowe. It was strange, at first, being seen. I had been invisible for so long that the attention almost felt too bright. But with each interview, each mention of Leo, each fan letter from readers who saw themselves in Mrs. Bellamy's quiet strength, I embraced it. I wasn't writing for survival anymore. I was writing to build something. One evening, Leo handed me a new drawing. It was a cover mock-up for a book he wanted me to write. The title was scrawled in crooked block letters, Detective Leo and the Case of the Hidden Heart. "That's you," he said, pointing at the mother character in the drawing. "She hides her real heart, but she's brave and solves everything." Tears pricked my eyes as I took the paper from him. "Do you think we should write it together?" He nodded. "We already are." Later that night, as I tucked him into bed, I looked around the room, the handmade mobile above his bed, the bookshelf filled with both my stories and his picture books, the photograph of us on the windowsill, smiling, unbothered by what had been lost. I sat at my desk afterward, opened a new document, and wrote the first line of the next novel. Sometimes, the best stories begin after everything else falls apart. A life rewritten, and this time, I held the pen.